all of us would kind of like this done sooner rather than later. If you're a team that wants Aaron Rodgers, you are going to make sure that there's space, right? I mean, he sort of controls this thing. I don't get the sense Rodgers in any hurry at all.
He could go follow the same path that Brett Favre once did.
Like with all things Aaron Rodgers, nothing is ever that simple. Even the most basic decisions need to be dragged on and be made as complex as humanly possible because Aaron Rodgers really likes all the attention on him. And frankly, I'm not the only one that's annoyed about this. Adam Schefter was annoyed about it as well.
To me, this shouldn't be that hard, right? Like the Steelers want you, the Giants want you. Players across the league make decisions. It shouldn't be that hard. Either you want to play or you don't. You want to play for Pittsburgh or you don't. You want to play in New York or you don't. Chewy, what are you going to have for lunch? You're going to make a decision, you're going to drag it out for 4 days, 5 days, a week. Like, it's not that hard. Make the decision and live with it.
So before we get to the content, we just made a brand new baseball channel called Uni Diamond Talk. Our first video is almost at 100,000 views, and to celebrate, we're giving away 10 copies of MLB The Show 25 to a subscriber that turns on our notifications on that channel. Now that we get all that out of the way, today's video is sponsored by Prize Picks. We've been having a dominant run making easy money on our NBA props that I give away on my Instagram at The Flight Mike and on my Patreon at Mikerophone. Make sure you use my promo code Mikerophone to get $50 when you make a play of $5 or more, or just click in the link in the description down below. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mike check 1212. What's going on, everybody? Aaron Rodgers' New York Jets tenure was an unmitigated disaster. And honestly, you could point the blame finger at both Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, and obviously a little bit of bad luck. In Aaron Rodgers' first season with the Jets, obviously 4 snaps into his career, he tore his Achilles tendon. But before his second season with the New York Jets, there are some things that I personally think he could have done better. He showed up to all voluntary workouts, but then he missed mandatory minicamp to go to Egypt, which I just found to be peculiar. But that was one of those stories that wouldn't be that big of a deal if the Jets had a good regular season. But they wouldn't, and a perfect combination of Aaron Rodgers being rusty and not being able to develop chemistry with his brand new teammates, and Brick Johnson wanting to fire everybody and trade every member of the New York Jets like it was Madden. You couldn't have asked for a worse season from Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Just a few weeks into the season, they fired their head coach Robert Saleh. They traded for Davante Adams. They got rid of one of their new additions in Mike Williams. A few months later, they fired their general manager Joe Douglas, who actually did a respectable job building this team. And once this team was only able to win 5 games, they told Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams they were moving on from them. And in my opinion, I think if this team was given enough time and there was actually consistency, they could have potentially worked out. But this was a very unfortunate situation for Aaron Rodgers because on paper, the New York Jets were Super Bowl contenders. They had a defensive-minded head coach. They had a top 5 or top 10 defense, at least in terms of the talent on their roster. They had 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL and a potent rushing attack. The only flaw that the New York Jets really had was they had a pretty terrible offensive line. They tried to address their terrible offensive line in the offseason. It didn't really work out. I guess the only thing I could blame Joe Douglas for is the fact that they passed on Brock Bowers, and that would have made an awesome offense on paper even crazier. So Brick Johnson decided to move on from the New York Jets, and Aaron Rodgers was placed in a very difficult situation, entering free agency at the age of 41. For his age 42 season, what was he going to do? Well, originally the options weren't that attractive. Aaron Rodgers' best chance was he had to hope that the Minnesota Vikings wanted to treat JJ McCarthy as Jordan Love, having him sit behind a veteran QB for 3 seasons before taking the reins. And that would have been a dream scenario because 1, Aaron Rodgers could fulfill the prophecy and join the Minnesota Vikings after getting traded to the New York Jets like Brett Favre did before him, but also it gives him a chance to get revenge against the Packers 2 times a year. And I think probably the coolest part of all is he'd have an all-star supporting cast. I mean, you saw what Sam Darnold was able to do with Kevin O'Connell coaching him, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison. He'd be reunited with Aaron Jones. He'd have a top 10 offensive line. He'd have one of the best defenses in the NFL. I mean, it'd be a really nice fit, but the downside is Aaron Rodgers would only be able to play with the Vikings for about a year before they would move on to JJ McCarthy. And that's only if they wanted to do do this with JJ McCarthy. It seems like the Vikings are out on Aaron Rodgers and they're ready to move forward with JJ McCarthy. At that point, I was assuming Aaron Rodgers would consider retirement because the only other option he had was the New York Giants. And with all due respect to the New York Giants, I'm not saying this because I'm a Cowboy fan. I feel this way about my Dallas Cowboys as well. I don't think you're an Aaron Rodgers away from winning the Super Bowl. There are so many issues with the New York Giants. I mean, their general manager quite literally moved on from Saquon Barkley, who was asking for a 3-year, $36 million contract, only to sign Darius Slayton to that same exact contract a year later after their division rival Philadelphia Eagles won a Super Bowl with Saquon. I mean, you can't make this up. But not only that, but the New York Giants have the 4th worst offensive line in the NFL. Their defense hasn't been the same since Wink Martindale left. And the worst part of all is you share a division with the 2 teams that represented the NFC in the NFC Championship last year. And one of those teams won a Super Bowl. I mean, there's no chance that Aaron Rodgers could take this team and make them into a Super Bowl contender. And at that point, I was thinking that Rodgers would consider retirement. But then a very interesting opportunity opened up. You see, it was rumored that the Pittsburgh Steelers were willing to do anything to bring back Justin Fields. But I guess that was just a pile of crap because the New York Jets signed Justin Fields to a 2-year, $40 million contract. And honestly, I like this move for the New York Jets because they have no offensive line and there's familiarity between Justin Fields and Garrett Wilson from their days in college together. Justin Fields is a dual threat QB, which should keep defenses on their toes if the New York Jets want to employ a very potent rushing attack and be a more run-first team this year to complement their defense. And if this blows up in their face, Justin Fields is on a relatively cheap contract. But this very much surprised me. I thought the Pittsburgh Steelers were going to move forward with Justin Fields and just not re-sign Russell Wilson. Once that happened, everything changed for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, there is no question in anyone's mind. This is an easy decision to make. Yeah, don't get me wrong. The AFC North is one of the most competitive divisions in football. Each and every one of these teams, except for the Cleveland Browns, have a chance to not only make it into the playoffs, but potentially represent the AFC in a Super Bowl. But it's also a very wild division because so much volatility occurs. One season, the Browns are being competitive, and then Deshaun Watson comes and messes that all up. The next season, the Cincinnati Bengals are being competitive, but their defense is so terrible that they're literally taking them out of games. The Ravens just signed DeAndre Hopkins on a very cheap deal, might I add. 1 year, $6 million. That's practically free, giving Lamar Jackson another weapon behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. And the Pittsburgh Steelers somehow, someway always find their way into the playoffs. But their quarterback play has always been something of a mystery. But so far, the Steelers have gone all in during the offseason. During the 2023 season, the Pittsburgh Steelers were one of the worst offenses in the NFL, the 4th worst offense in the NFL if we're being exact. Then last offseason, they hired Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator. They brought in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and next thing you know, they did finish with the same exact record, but they were able to improve that mark from 4th worst to the 16th worst team in the NFL in terms of points for. So now they're going all in on improving their offense because defensively, they've always been a solid team. They traded for DK Metcalf a few days ago, and that resulted in a lot of fans joking about who is going to throw DK Metcalf, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth the football. And well, I feel like at this point, it's a very easy decision to make. This was what Aaron Rodgers had to say about the Pittsburgh Steelers 4 years ago on the Pat McAfee show.
So I've been around a lot of Pittsburgh people over the years. I've loved my time with all of them, but I have a ton of respect for Mike. I think he's a fantastic coach. I love the way that he leads. I love the way he talks after the game.
And here's the thing, Aaron Rodgers is very much screwing over the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. I mean, the Steelers waited 2 days throughout the legal tampering period to get an answer from Aaron Rodgers, who is deciding between the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New York Giants, and retirement. So he's pretty much holding this organization hostage, and that's what former NFL GM Doug Whaley said. There's obviously a reason why they moved on from Justin Fields, and that's because they feel like Aaron Rodgers is an upgrade. Now, I know what you guys might be thinking. You're probably thinking that I'm being a tad bit melodramatic, but then you have to understand that the Steelers are putting all of their eggs in the Aaron Rodgers basket. Like I mentioned before, they already let Justin Fields leave to the New York Jets on a 2-year, $40 million deal, which means the only options that the Steelers have left is Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Kirk Cousins. Now, here's where it gets a little disturbing. Russell Wilson is already taking free agency meetings with other teams, with good reason, because you also have to understand that Russell Russell Wilson isn't just going to sit back and wait for the Pittsburgh Steelers to make a decision on whether or not they want to move forward with him. And that's exactly what he said that he's doing. According to Adam Schefter, Russell Wilson is scheduled to fly to Cleveland to visit with the Browns on Thursday, before being scheduled to fly to New York on Thursday night to visit Friday with the New York Giants. So Russell Wilson is already looking towards moving on, and if he signs with the Cleveland Browns or the New York Giants, then all the Pittsburgh Steelers have left is either Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins. Now here's where it gets kind of crazy. Aaron Rodgers wasn't a shoo-in to definitely sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, apart from the New York Giants, which I don't necessarily think is the top option or the best situation for him, Aaron Rodgers decided to do the most Aaron Rodgers thing possible and walk on the beach while wearing wired headphones while contemplating his future. And here's the thing that I'm wondering when I see this, because I think it's a beautiful way to decide whether you want to actually continue playing football or not. But what I'm wondering is, did Aaron Rodgers have someone take a photo of him walking on the beach with a blanket with wired headphones listening to music as he's trying to contemplate his future? Or did a fan just happen to capture this image? My favorite part is Dove Kleiman, the guy that tweeted this out, said this is such a powerful moment that was captured, but I think this is manufactured content by Aaron Rodgers. But regardless, the Steelers are all in on Aaron Rodgers to the point where they let their other best QB options sign with other teams. And I don't know why Rodgers would do this. I don't know if he's trying to get more money out of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's placed in a great situation where his value indicates that he should agree to a bit of a pay cut, agreeing to get paid maybe $20 million for this season, maybe $25 million during this season. But the Steelers team is very similar to what the New York Jets were last year. They have one of the worst offensive lines in football. They have an incredible defense. The only difference I'd say is their rushing attack isn't nearly as good as the New York Jets rushing attack was, at least on paper, and they're about to lose Najee Harris to the LA Chargers, but there's stability in their head coaching staff. There's clear upgrades in terms of their head coach and their offensive coordinator, and even their wide receiver core that's significantly younger than what the New York Jets had. Now, originally I thought Aaron Rodgers would make his decision within the first few days of free agency, primarily because he's holding multiple teams hostage here, and he's holding the future of many NFL careers in the palm of his hands. But in typical Aaron Rodgers fashion, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. As a matter of fact, he might drag this until the NFL draft. Watch.
I don't get the sense he's in a hurry at all, and there's no deadline for him to be. Usually, if you're a free agent, you would say like, all right, I gotta sign by maybe Monday afternoon or maybe Tuesday morning, otherwise the money's gonna be dried up. It's not like that at the quarterback position. You're gonna do everything you can to let him know, hey, whenever you make a decision, we got you. He doesn't have to decide by any time. So if you're the Giants or the Vikings or the Steelers or whoever, if it's anyone, then you'd like it now, but do you draft someone a month or so away? Could it go all the way to the draft like it did 2 years ago? Maybe it could.
And honestly, the Pittsburgh Steelers have nobody to blame but themselves, because they can get burned in this situation because there's multiple options that don't involve Aaron Rodgers going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what are the other options? Well, originally we thought it was either going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New York Giants, or Aaron Rodgers was just going to retire, which wouldn't be the worst decision because I don't think Aaron Rodgers makes the New York Giants a Super Bowl contender. I do think Aaron Rodgers, depending on how he plays this year, could potentially elevate the Pittsburgh Steelers into contention. But the most intriguing decision here is one that we've prophesized many times in the past, and that's primarily because there's a running meme in the NFL community that Aaron Rodgers is following Brett Favre's career to a T. I mean, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. Aaron Rodgers was drafted by the Green Bay Packers, sat behind Brett Favre for a few years before taking over the reins for the Green Bay Packers, leading them to a Super Bowl, winning multiple MVPs, and then having the Green Bay Packers draft Jordan Love towards the tail end of his career with them, so Aaron Rodgers could mentor Jordan Love. Following that, Aaron Rodgers got traded to the New York Jets, just like Brett Favre did. Played a solid season for them on paper, but if you were actually watching the games, it was a nightmare and show before mulling retirement or deciding to sign with the Minnesota Vikings. Now you might be wondering,
Mike, you just said that the Minnesota Vikings were not interested in Aaron Rodgers.
But a few days later, we found out that the Vikings actually discussed Aaron Rodgers internally. And this is where it gets really interesting, because originally we thought the Minnesota Vikings were going to move forward with JJ McCarthy, and Aaron Rodgers was going to either join the Pittsburgh Steelers, retire, or join the New York Giants. But apparently, Rodgers to Minnesota has gained some traction. action. And this is where it gets really interesting. Adam Schefter told us a bit about this situation on the Pat McAfee show.
With Aaron Rodgers, we don't fully know. We can only surmise. Rodgers had his way. I believe that he would like to sign with the Minnesota Vikings. Do I think it's likely? No. But I just don't know that it's practical for the Vikings. This is a team that invested the 10th overall pick last year in J.J. McCarthy. Minnesota come around at some point in time and say, you know what? J.J.'s slow to come back from his torn meniscus last year. Could they then revisit Aaron Rodgers and say, you know what? This guy's going to give us a chance. Is it happening today or anytime soon? It doesn't sound that way.
So it's clear that the Minnesota Vikings at least spoke about potentially adding Aaron Rodgers, but they're a little bit on the fence about it. Rodgers has mentioned in the past that he's expecting a contract that is similar to the one that Sam Darnold signed, a 3-year, $100 million contract that you could void after the second and third year if he doesn't work out. But the J.J. McCarthy situation is what makes this very unique. Do the Minnesota Vikings feel like they're ready to move forward with McCarthy? On one hand, sitting behind Aaron Rodgers and learning from one of the greatest quarterbacks of your generation could without a doubt do wonders for a player's development. I mean, we saw how it worked with Jordan Love. The strategy of drafting and stashing a first-round QB has already proven to work in the past, unless if you happen to be Trey Lance. But there's also a huge caveat with this strategy. Every season that you have your first-round QB riding the bench is one less season that you get to take advantage of his undervalued rookie scale contract. I mean, take a look at what the Houston Texans were able to do with CJ Stroud in trading for Stephon Diggs, signing Derek Stingley Jr. to the largest contract that a defensive back has ever received in NFL history. Historically, we've seen rookie scale contract QBs get additional help primarily because you don't have to pay your QB $40 or $50 million plus annually. But some of the decisions that the Minnesota Vikings have also made may indicate that they're leaning towards signing Aaron Rodgers. For instance, the Minnesota Vikings released Garrett Bradbury. Bradbury was on a $15.75 million contract with the team. His contract had no guaranteed money for this year. Since the team is releasing him post June 1st, it means they'll be able to spread out his financial hit of his contract over 2 years. Minnesota takes on a $2.44 million dead cap hit, but they have money to sign an additional player. Some fans are speculating that this additional player could be Aaron Rodgers. And don't get me wrong, it'd be really cool to see Aaron Rodgers go to Minnesota. But the thing is, if he does go to Minnesota, let's say he wants to play beyond this year, it pretty much indicates that this is going to be his last dance. And then Minnesota is placed in a very strange situation once again. What if Aaron Rodgers leads them to a Super Bowl? That's another year of J.J. McCarthy potentially watching from the bench. Do they move on from Aaron Rodgers after one successful year if he does win them a Super Bowl, which is definitely possible? Does it make sense to just move forward with J.J. McCarthy with this all-star cast that features Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, the newly re-signed Aaron Jones? And that's the thing the Minnesota Vikings are weighing out, and I believe that's why Aaron Rodgers hasn't made a decision yet, because he's waiting on the Minnesota Vikings to make a decision themselves, because it seems like Minnesota is his top team. And how can it not be his top team? I mean, when you compare the Pittsburgh Steelers offense versus the Minnesota Vikings offense, there's really no comparison. If Aaron Rodgers was to go to Pittsburgh and team up with Arthur Smith, George Pickens, and DK Metcalf, I have no doubt that it will yield incredible results. But Minnesota would just be so easy for Aaron Rodgers, throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, teaming up with Kevin O'Connell that made Sam Darnold an MVP candidate last year. But the crazy part about this is the Pittsburgh Steelers were very irresponsible in trying to figure out their answer at quarterback because they put all their eggs in the Aaron Rodgers basket. They already let Justin Fields walk and sign with the New York Jets, which apparently they offered him a very competitive contract. The Steelers were reportedly all in on Justin Fields, but the Jets had a slightly better offer, and Justin Fields got to team up with his former college buddy Garrett Wilson, so I am assuming that was a little bit more attractive. Now Russell Wilson might be out the door as well, and it seems like Steelers players are already really frustrated about this situation. Listen to what Cam Hayward had to say about Aaron Rodgers.
Either you want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler or you don't. That's simple. That's the pitch. If you want me to recruit, that's the recruiting pitch.
I just find it very comical that Aaron Rodgers is holding all these teams hostage. I mean, I think the New York Giants have a contingency plan in place because it's clear that the Tennessee Titans, even though they say they love Cam Ward, it's very clear that they're going to trend towards drafting Abdul Carter in the NFL draft. I'm expecting them to trade down, which means a quarterback prospect should fall to the Cleveland Browns and the New York Giants. So if the Giants don't get Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, then I expect them to take Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward during the NFL draft. If the Minnesota Vikings decide to pass on Aaron Rodgers, they're just going to move forward with JJ McCarthy, and that's not a bad strategy either. But the Pittsburgh Steelers are in the worst situation of all. It's pretty much they either move forward with Aaron Rodgers or they move forward with Mason Rudolph. And in the juggernaut that is the AFC North, I mean, well, it's not really as much of a juggernaut now that the Cleveland Browns destroyed themselves, but the Steelers are competing with the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think Mason Rudolph is enough to compete in this division where you're already notorious for occupying a playoff spot each and every year before losing prematurely. It's just really funny that the Steelers went all in on trading for DK Metcalf, and they have George Pickens, and they might have Mason Rudolph throwing them the football this year. Let me know in the comment section down below, where do you think Aaron Rodgers is going to go next? I personally think he's made his decision and wants to go to the Minnesota Vikings, but he's waiting to see whether or not the Minnesota Vikings want him. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I don't know if you guys heard, but the Cincinnati Bengals finally decided to pay Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and I personally think it was a horrific mistake. I break down why in the video in the end screen, and I'll meet you guys there. I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.